Although many military vehicles used during the Second World War are well documented, this is unfortunately not always the case. Historians and hobbyists have come across information or even pictures about vehicles that no one has known to exist before during their research. This especially applies to the last year of the war, when the Germans and the Japanese were desperately trying to fit different weapons on any available chassis. If not for existing photographs, many such modifications would have vanished in the sands of time. This is the case with two Japanese modifications based on the well-known Type 95 Ha-Go, today known as the Type 5 Ho-To and Ho-Ru. Japanese tank design during the Second World War was influenced by various factors, including the country's industrial limitation and the unique terrain of the Pacific and Southeast Asia. The Japanese faced challenges such as mountainous regions and islands with limited road infrastructure, which called for a different approach to tank design compared to the vehicles suited for the terrains of Europe or North Africa. Given these circumstances, the Japanese opted for light, cheap, and Spartan tank designs. The Ha-Go was one of the most produced and successful light tanks in the early stages of the war for Japan. It had a simple construction and was lightly armed and armored. Although these characteristics led to an undeserved reputation of being outdated and obsolete, the Ha-Go was actually well suited for the specific terrain and operational requirements the Japanese faced. The Japanese tanks prioritized speed and maneuverability over heavy armor and firepower. By sacrificing armor, they were able to achieve rapid movement, allowing them to outpace and surprise the defending allies, and to be relatively easily deployed on the many Pacific islands with unspecialized ships. The simplicity of construction also played a significant role, as it enabled the crews to quickly repair their vehicles with minimal effort. While the defending allies possessed superior tank designs, the Japanese capitalized on the advantages of their light tanks. Their low weight and mobility allowed them to traverse difficult terrain and attack positions that were considered impassable by tanks. This strategy often caught the enemy off guard and gave the Japanese tactical advantages. As the war progressed, the Japanese were eventually outmatched by technological advancements from the Allies, which made their light tanks increasingly hopeless. However, during the early expansion in Asia and the Pacific, the Ha-Go and similar designs proved effective in fulfilling their intended roles. Things changed greatly when the Japanese went on defense. The lightly armored and armed tanks proved no match for the new Allied tanks such as the M3 light tanks and later M4 Shermans. The Japanese 37mm, or 1.45-inch, and the larger 47mm, 1.85-inch, tank guns were simply not strong enough to deal with the enemy armor effectively. During this period, the Japanese focused on adapting existing tank chassis and creating self-propelled guns to enhance their firepower. The Type 97 Chiha chassis served as the basis for a series of self-propelled guns which were armed with various calibers of weapons ranging from 75mm to 150mm, or 2.95 to 5.9 inches. These guns were typically mounted in open fighting compartments or highly modified turrets. However, due to limited industrial capabilities and shortages of construction materials, the production of these vehicles was constrained. They were built in small series and issued to troops in limited numbers or sometimes not at all. Despite their imperfections, some were deployed in combat, providing the Japanese with a means to fight back when more advanced options were unavailable. By 1944 and 1945, Japan was facing significant challenges on all fronts, and its industry struggled to keep up with the demands of the war. The production of armored vehicles could not adequately meet the requirements, and the situation reflected the overall resource and industrial limitations faced by Japan. At this stage of the war, the Japanese made a few desperate attempts to repurpose existing tank chassis and arm them with different weapons to fulfill specific roles, either as anti-tank or as mobile artillery. The Ha-Go, despite its obsolescence, was still available in some numbers in 1945. Given the available chassis, the Japanese only had to find suitable weapons to mount on it. This would lead to the creation of two modifications adapted for different purposes but sharing the same chassis. One was the Type 5 Ho-Ru 47mm armed tank hunter, and the second was a self-propelled version, armed with a howitzer designated as Type 5 Ho-2, also sometimes referred to as Type 4, or simply as Ho-2. It's important to note that, due to the chaotic nature of the final year of the war and the scarcity of resources, documentation on these vehicles is limited. As a result, specific details such as who built them, who ordered them, and numbers regarding their production or even deployment are not recorded. For example, we know of the Ho-Ru's existence only through a poorly made drawing, of which authenticity is difficult to confirm. While these two vehicles were designed with different roles in mind, they still shared a number of components taken from the Ha-Go tank. The Ha-Go tank hull was unchanged. It consisted of the front-mounted transmission, central crew compartment, and rear-positioned engine. It is unknown if the engine was changed or modified in any way. It is highly likely that, due to a general lack of resources, the 120 horsepower Mitsubishi 6-cylinder diesel engine was left unchanged. The overall drive performance of these two vehicles is unknown. While many components of the original tanks were removed, others were added, such as the new armament and superstructure. This meant that the weight remained relatively the same or even increased compared to the original 7.4 tons, or 16,314 pounds. The suspension system of the Ha-Go remained unchanged. It consisted of a bell crank suspension with bogies mounted on arms, connected to a long helical compression spring placed horizontally on the sides of the hull. The tank had 4 road wheels, with 2 large wheels per bogie, 3 return rollers, a rear idler, and a front-mounted drive sprocket. The most notable difference between the two vehicles is the superstructure. In both cases, the upper parts of the Ha-Go body armor, including the turret, were removed and replaced with a new superstructure. Given that the Ho-Ru was intended to act as a tank hunter, it received a new enclosed superstructure to protect the crew. It consisted of angled plates which appear to have been welded to each other. On the front armor plate, the gun position was slightly offset to the left. To the lower right, a driver visor port was located. While the front part of the top armor was enclosed, it is difficult to know if this was the case with the rear part. If it was indeed enclosed, then there would have been at least 1 or 2 hatches for the crew to enter or exit the vehicle. It is also possible that it was open-topped. This somewhat makes sense, as the Ho-Ru was rather a small vehicle, and this would have given the crew more room to operate the gun. In addition, it would have provided necessary ventilation for the exhaust gases created after firing the gun. The armor thickness of the Ho-Ru's new superstructure is unknown. The main armament of this vehicle consisted of a 47mm Type 1 anti-tank gun, modified for tank use. It was able to penetrate some 52mm or 2.04 inches of flat armor at a distance of 1 kilometer, or 0.62 miles. The muzzle velocity of this round was 827 meters per second. While it could engage older Allied tanks, by the time this weapon became available in sufficient numbers, the Allies had introduced better armored designs, such as the M4 tanks. The 47mm anti-tank gun could destroy an M4 from the sides at closer ranges, but frontally could do little against it. There is no information about the ammunition load on the Ho-Ru, but given the small size, it probably would have been limited. Even the number of crew is unknown. The Ha-Go interior only had room for 2 crew members, plus the commander and the turret. As the Ho-Ru lacked a turret, there was only room for the driver and the commander. If this was the case, then the commander would have had the additional task of operating the gun. The driver was positioned on the left side of the vehicle and probably acted as the loader. As such, the commander/gun operator would have been completely overworked, reducing performance and effectiveness. The Ho-Ru was probably meant to act more as an ambush vehicle, similar to the German Jagdpanzer 38T, using good firing positions and concealment to reach the sides of enemy tanks at relatively close ranges during the invasion of the Japanese home islands. Being self-propelled would have given it a better chance to retreat afterwards than a towed gun, and the limited armor would have afforded some protection against machine guns and artillery. Given the larger armament, the Ho-To received an open-top superstructure. It too appears to have been constructed of welded armor plates. There are a few bolts noticeable in the front plate which indicate that it was connected to some form of a frame behind it. Due to limited space inside the vehicle, part of the main gun elevation cradle protruded out of this protective shield. There was also an observation hatch for the driver, located in the right bottom corner. Lastly, on the top left was what appears to be a small opening, possibly used for the gun sight. The sight was only partially protected, and being open top made the crew quite exposed to enemy return fire and shrapnel. This, together with an armor thickness of 8 mm, meant that if this vehicle was intended to be used in a more offensive role, crew survivability would be quite low. The main armament of the Ho-To consisted of one 12 cm or 4.72 inch Type 38 field howitzer. It used two-piece ammunition, with the cartridge and the powder propellant being separated. The muzzle velocity was only 290 meters per second, which gave it a maximum firing range of a meager 5,670 meters, or 18,600 feet. While it would be relegated to second-line duties due to its obsolescence, the Japanese developed shape-charged ammunition for it that could penetrate some 140 millimeters, or 5.51 inches, of armor. There is no information about the ammunition load for this vehicle. Given the generally small vehicle size compared with the large two-part ammunition, it would be limited to a few rounds. As with the Ho-Ru, the crew number is unknown, but it likely consisted of two, the driver and the gunner/commander. It is possible that the driver also acted as a loader. An alternative would be that other crew members, such as a dedicated loader, could have traveled with a separate vehicle, also carrying extra ammunition. The Ho-To was meant to provide the Japanese army either with close support, similar to the German Sturmhaubitze, or with medium-range high-explosive, like the Grill or Priest. In both cases, the low ammunition count would have made the vehicle severely dependent on soft-skinned supply vehicles, but with better mobility than towed guns, increasing effectiveness and survivability. According to the available information, the Ho-Ru prototype is believed to have been completed around April 1945 and underwent testing during the summer of that year. However, what happened to the vehicle after that point remains unclear. There are two main hypotheses regarding its final fate. The first suggests that the Japanese conducted tests on the Ho-Ru, but encountered various issues or lacked the necessary resources to proceed with further production. As a result, the project may have been abandoned, and the prototype possibly scrapped. It is also possible that the prototype or plans were destroyed during one of the Allied bombing raids. The second hypothesis proposes that the prototype was left for the defense of the Japanese home islands and subsequently captured by the Allies. However, due to the lack of mentions of the Ho-Ru in available sources and the absence of surviving pictures, the first option appears to be closer to the truth. Almost nothing is known about Ho-To in secondary sources. What is known is that at least one vehicle was built and probably tested. How it performed, unfortunately, is unknown. It was either a failure as a design, or the end of the war prevented any further work on it. That concludes our video on these two obscure and generally poorly documented Japanese vehicles. What are your thoughts on these two? Was there any merit in their design, or were they just a product of desperation? Share your opinions in the comments section. If you haven't done so already, we invite you to subscribe to stay updated on future content. If you'd like to contribute further, consider supporting us on Patreon or PayPal. Your contributions help us create more engaging videos. Until next time, stay focused and stay tuned.